love it.
So do that every day.
Yeah.
When I sold books, to start my day, get a little smile on.
I'm going to try it.
You got to push up. You push it up and do a smile.
Is this a good outtake?
And had come on board with me, trusting me for their future.
Yeah.
And he said, shut it down. And the simple thing is that's what we did.
The simple thing.
It was simple.
Not the easy.
Welcome to the Value Factory Podcast, brought to you by OneAccord. We're all about helping businesses thrive and grow through leadership, strategy, and meaningful impact. Now, whether you're a seasoned executive or just starting out, our goal is to provide insights and inspiration to help you navigate your journey. Thanks for tuning in.
Here we are. Jeff Rogers, myself, Nick Anderson, Jeff, the founder of OneAccord, myself, CEO. We're in the Value Factory in the upper room at our, what I've referred to as our galactic headquarters of OneAccord. Seems pretty reasonable that maybe in our lifetime we could see some people on a spaceship flying far, far away. So
Elon thinks so.
That's, I know. So here we are, galactic headquarters of OneAccord in Kirkland, Washington. We're gonna.
That light just blinked. Did you see that?
It does.
Does it do that for us?
It does. Yeah.
Cool.
It's a little strobe effect.
Cool.
It's the joy of being in the galactic headquarters,
That's right.
which is a 100-year-old home.
It is 100.
Yep. And it's cute, it's quaint, and it has some
options.
Quirks, some options. Yeah. Boy, how many meetings, how many clients served, how many stories in this building.
Wow.
It's, at least 600, 650, pushing 700 in the year 2025. That's a part of the conversation today.
Yeah.
Our first Value Factory conversation, episode 1 of the podcast, we had a red curtain, and now we have a blue curtain. We're evolving.
That's the color of, if I understand, it's the color of peace.
Blue is.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what it evokes, but it's also symbolically so.
It's good.
Yeah.
It's better aligned with our brand.
Yes.
Yeah. Today we're going to talk about the story, the history of OneAccord.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be a long conversation, potentially. We'll cover a lot of ground. So let's dive in.
Yeah, it's great. I think it's great to capture a story, as it gives us roots that are important to understand, that we can, with the vision of where we're going, can be built on almost like the momentum factor of that trajectory, right? So understanding where we've come from, which interestingly, as even today, we look at the future and, there's changes in the markets and changes in geopolitical and, baby boomers weren't so much a thing in the marketplace when we began in 2000. But yet the essence of both our values, which have remained consistent, and generally speaking, the value that we bring to serving clients has remained consistent for that 25 years.
Yeah.
Interestingly, just as a little note on that, I was thinking, I believe that OneAccord moved into this space in 2012. So if you think of from when we started to where we are today, basically halfway through that time, we've been in this very place. So as we reflect out of that total number of clients, how many client meetings, how many team meetings, how many mixers. I've been in this very room scrumming with numerous team members as we try and bring a team around what the potential client, or in this case, mostly actual clients, trying to come up with solutions to help them get where they want to go.
Yeah.
We would sit in this room as a place to have an all-day meeting, so downstairs could be used for other meetings and so on. And, throwing sticky notes and whiteboards up as we scrum through as a team. So lots happened here since 2012.
I'm struck by this notion of storytelling, of capturing history. If we could frame this is a new thought, as though we're telling the story to our kids.
Okay.
About, how OneAccord came to be.
Okay.
And that it's
that's
this
a
kind
context.
of historical look back. Like, how do we explain the company, the business, to somebody who isn't in it, but somebody that we care deeply about, that we want them to know? And I was just thinking of that, I don't know that my kids understand what we do, how we do it.
Unless you've educated your kids better than we have on that.
Yeah.
A traditional answer is, well, you're going to have to ask my dad.
Yeah.
I don't really know how to explain it until, and maybe this is a great way for us to view our time, is to think about our kids being the recipient of the message, or those that don't know anything.
Right.
And I recognize that to be the case, and actually had a client interaction engagement with our 3 kids, led by Ryan Shope, Treating, and Andrew Larson. They did 2 different sessions actually with our kids, explaining who is OneAccord and what OneAccord does.
Yeah.
And finally, not only were they like, okay, now we get it. So I would say today, based on that, which is only 2 years ago, that they have an understanding. They came away so proud.
Yeah.
And just so encouraged by what they heard about what we do in serving those hundreds of clients, right? Hearing that story. So I think that's a great way to do it.
And I was reminded of Andrew sharing that with me just in this moment, which created the content. But maybe our families don't know the history. So let's go
absolutely
all the way back to the origin, the start of OneAccord.
Okay.
Now, I've heard you tell the story of leaving Southwestern Company and Amy saying to you, you can do whatever you want to do.
Correct.
And I
literally.
And I love the fact that your response was, well, somebody already started Park Place Motors. And today you're the chairman of Park Place Motors. And so,
which wouldn't have ever happened without OneAccord.
Yeah.
Could not have come in.
So that's just an awesome kind of sidebar story. But let's go back to that moment, that time in history.
I'm honored to tell you the story. And I would be hopeful that as I do, and we capture this as a moment in time, that what is recollected would be consistent with what others have heard throughout time, that the story hasn't morphed as the way our brain works, based especially on recent experiences that we kind of can tie in, but it actually stays true to the founding. So to give that backstory, so I grew up in the Northwest, and that's actually contextual to the story of OneAccord. So I grew up in the Northwest, and I worked for this company called Southwestern from 1980 to 2000, which will reveal just I'm quite old. Like, people do the math. They're like, you were working full time in 1980. It's true. And I worked for that company 20 years. It's interesting because it's called Southwestern. It's in Nashville, Tennessee.
Yeah.
And it was founded in 1855.
Wow.
And so that was the Southwest US. That's why it's called that.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, that's where it got its name. So many of us, if not all of us, may find a time where we're called out of something, where
Mm-hmm.
where there's a clarity that it's time for me to move to a new situation. And that can mean a lot of different things, but including in that context could be work, right?
Yeah.
So I actually knew 2 years before I left that business that I would need to leave. And I met with the CEO and I said, I would like to develop a couple of people to make sure to take the baton, but that they're well prepared, they're well set up for success. And I knew if I had left at that time, they weren't ready and they would have been swallowed up by another manager that wouldn't have been in the best interest of the group that we had built culturally based on our value set. So I said to him, would you give me 2 years? Now, as we think about OneAccord today, and I'll just ask you, what's the majority of clients or the single biggest kind of issue that we're helping owners work through is what?
The language that we use, the inside baseball, is owner dependency.
Okay.
It shows up as succession planning. It's that who else
Right.
other than the owner founder that can run this organization, lead the company.
Right. So it's that succession, that transition.
Yep.
Right. So now I'm doing what I just said earlier. I'm reflecting today, going back into the past.
Yeah.
Right. And so very early on, I had this notion that the importance of making sure that the baton can be handed off well.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I did in those last final years is I set up a couple of people to be able to take that business. But in order to do so, I needed to remain intensely focused.
Mm-hmm.
So I had no idea what I was going to go do. And so when I left that business after those 20 years, I took a little sabbatical. And then I started the process of exploring now what. So this is 2000. And I had a couple guys that I worked with at Southwestern say to me when I left, we would love to talk to you about being in business with us when you're ready to have the conversation. So credit to them. They waited till I was gone. And they were two friends of mine, Tom and John, that were based out of Florida and Nashville, JT and Joel, that were Nashville and kind of Midwest. And they were doing a technology staffing business. And they asked me to open up the West Coast branch of that. And then we would do a roll up into one company.
Mm-hmm.
And an exit had already been prepared to go to IBM Global Solutions. That was the idea. So I looked at a number of different things, and that's what I settled on doing. And we had a very specific niche, especially around helping companies grow profitable revenue. And what happened is we would get in front of we were 100% focused on technology. Okay, so technology companies, not always early stage, but where they were looking to grow and scale. So we're around this notion of growth and scale. Still today, part of the OneAccord value proposition. And so this is 2000, 2001. In the first quarter of 2001, the market began to get wobbly.
Yep.
Now, 9/11 happened later that year.
Mm-hmm.
That was an exclamation point.
Yeah.
And at that Q1 of that year, a lot of the business that we had started to dry up.
Mm-hmm.
Just people were sitting on their hands about, I'm not sure where the market's going to go. Of course, we can look retrospectively at it, but at the time when you're going through, the question is, as a business owner, do you continue to invest and keep people on staff when you don't have enough money to, support them in current client engagements? And that was a lot of our clients, but it was also us as a business.
Yeah.
And so in 2001, sorry, I've got a little fuzzy thing itching my
tickle.
Yeah. Okay, great thing being able to edit.
Yeah.
Okay. So in 2001, when that market was getting shaky, I, as we're working with client companies, I'm seeing that there are more issues that they're having than just the revenue side of the equation.
Mm-hmm.
But at that time, we were focused exclusively on revenue. And I would argue for those that have a professional services company, being narrow in an industry and being very focused on one core deliverable is a much easier way to scale a profitable business.
Right.
It may not be the mission of
Mm-hmm.
the organization. And so we were at a crossroads.
And was the company you started in 2000 called OneAccord?
So we started, the answer is no.
Okay.
Okay. We started the company is called Red Rover Solutions, as in Red Rover, send Nick right over.
Yeah.
And our focus, going back to where we began, was on the staffing and people side for technology for them to be able to scale. While at the same time, I had this consultative practice to help them in overall sales strategy and growth,
Mm-hmm.
as many technology firms kind of had this approach: if we build it, they will come.
Yeah.
And that often wasn't happening. So they were coming to us for people and staffing solutions. And I would parlay that over into this consultative side. Okay, so now we're in 2001. And I'm watching the market crash. I'm seeing people laid off. And part of my story, which is separate from, but also part of the history of OneAccord, was this notion of seeing a number of people affected by a massive change in the market that are displaced and businesses languishing. And so I have clients that are really, really struggling, and I'm helping them to find advisors and board members to try and help them get through. In this idea of, in a certain subset of the market, why isn't there support for one another? Where's the help around this? And so that led, I think, through me, not necessarily me, to start an organization called Kairos, which exists today, which has several thousand business people, men and women in it, a couple different chapters. But that was originally founded with this idea of, why doesn't that community serve each other? And my simple answer, Nick, was they didn't know each other.
Yeah.
It's not that they wouldn't. They literally didn't know who each other were.
And this is the year 2001?
2001.
So you've got Red Rover Solutions.
Yep.
And the market starts turning.
Correct.
You recognize that there's an opportunity, if not even a need, to create a space for people to come together, and you create Kairos. 2001.
Simultaneous. Yeah, at the same time.
Yeah.
Correct. So that's a very much part of the tapestry of OneAccord, actually, in terms of relationships, clients, team members that have been part of OneAccord over a number of years. But I'll stay on the OneAccord side of the ledger in terms of that part of the story. So we're helping companies kind of navigate through this time, but it's a really difficult time.
How many people are we at Red Rover Solutions in this 2001 era?
So we had 16 employees, W-2s, plus admin, accounting support, myself. So, close to 20 total that are part of that team in Red Rover, in an employee model, not a independent contractor model. So as this is happening, I'm finding a dissonance in my own alignment with my gifts and skills and passions with what the business of Red Rover Solutions was at that time.
Oh, interesting.
And so that was because, on one hand, we're consulting, But on the other hand, we have this staffing business.
Mm-hmm.
So I did something fairly unique as a owner of a business that is along the lines again of what I look at today, that by God's grace, perhaps I was willing to take some steps that I find many business owners can be reluctant to do. And that is to have counsel, third party counsel, outside advice.
This is a couple of years into, I mean, you started in 2000, it's 2001, maybe 2002 now.
Correct. 2001, 2002.
And you go externally and say,
I form a board.
oh,
So what I did is I went to several business leaders that I highly respected that intentionally were not in my inner ecosystem, which is a bit of a challenging notion to discuss.
Yeah.
But I wanted people that I trusted and I admired in business that weren't so close to me that they would tell me necessarily what I wanted to hear, or they would be people that wouldn't be afraid to offend me.
Yeah.
So I didn't get that closest inner. I kind of went out of ring to people that I knew, and they had really strong business savvy and experience. And some of them are fairly well known in this community today because of their acumen in business. So I formed a board and I gave that board voting board rights. And I signed a contract. So legally, I actually had to do what they said. So I surrendered control to a third party board.
Red Rover Solutions is a LLC at this time.
LLC.
You're the sole member.
Yep. Well, Amy and I.
Okay. Yeah. Good point. But you surrender control to a board. Were they volunteer? Were they paid? They were
volunteer. And I would hope that at some point there would be an opportunity for me to at least give them a really nice dinner.
Yeah.
And my hope was maybe a trip to Hawaii if
Yeah.
things turned out really well.
Yeah.
But they did it on a volunteer basis. And there were monthly meetings for a couple months.
Mm-hmm.
And then the plan was, once we got through this keyhole of decision where the company was going to go, that we would then have quarterly accountability.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I'm sitting in the board meeting, laying out all our financials,
Wow.
all our contracts, all our clients, everything. And a couple of things happened that are important. One was that the market is in such turmoil that this idea of doing a roll up and being part of these other two companies, you should separate from them. Now, we weren't legally tied together. And to this day, those guys are extraordinarily close friends. So no damage of relationship. And they agreed. But I felt like the vision that we had wasn't going to happen.
Mm-hmm. That collective vision of rolling up and exiting to a strategic.
Correct. And I was having a hard time coming to the conversation with them to say, I think what we set out to do isn't going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And we had all worked together. And in the business we came from, you learn to go over, under, around, through.
Yeah.
You don't quit.
Yeah.
You don't stop. You find another way. You pivot on the pivot, but you keep going.
Like Churchill.
Right.
Never, ever
give up.
Yeah.
And that was how I was trained for 20 years of business. And I generally agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
But I felt like the market, the rug had been pulled out from under us and no one had said it. So the first thing the board did is say, that vision you have is no longer a reality. So that means we had to end that relationship. We could still refer business to each other. That's fine. So that was one. But the most significant in that meeting was Barry Horn looking, and he's saying, you've got the consulting side of the business and you have the staffing. And it's very commonplace for consulting firms to have staffing, if not actually truly actually being a staffing organization. I mean, if you look at Deloitte or Accenture or others, that's a big part of their model. We were similar. We're just very small. But Barry looked and he said to the board, Jeff, shut that staffing down. The dog
Wow.
won't hunt.
Wow.
And I was like, why? And here's what he said, and it's obviously stuck with me. He said, you're relational, that business is transactional.
Mm.
You'll never thrive in it because it's not who you are.
What an important bit of advice, because the staffing model is a viable business model.
Very much.
For sure. But he's just saying, in the context of who you are as the leader, the founder, it's a mismatch, not aligned with your gift and your
Correct.
Your makeup.
Correct.
Wow.
So 16 employees.
Hmm.
Almost all of those, if not all of them, not all of them, almost all of them were people who I had worked with previously, who had left Southwestern
Mm-hmm.
and had come on board with me, trusting me
Mm.
for their future.
Yeah.
And he said, shut it down. And the simple thing is, that's what we did.
The simple thing.
It was
Not-
simple.
Not the easy thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But I think having, third-party counsel to rely upon, and as part of this board was also Amy, my wife.
Hmm.
And there, again, for accountability. And I'm not suggesting business owners should or shouldn't do that, but if you're in a marriage partner relationship, you should make sure there's alignment. We find in hundreds of clients that where there's being of one accord, one mind, the opposite is discord.
Right.
Where there's discord amongst really the owner founders, be it in their own family or with a business partner, at the core, that's a lot of the issues actually,
Right.
is finding alignment. So Amy was aligned, would be the point. And she really trusted this board to make good decisions and was in alignment. So what Barry did is basically say, stay on this consultative side.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So as we're moving through 2002, 2003, I realized we're in a different business. Red Rover, send Nick right over.
Yeah.
Applies to a staffing
Right.
mindset. And so I decide that we should be a new company. We should be a total, complete reset, name, brand. And we have really been consulting companies since our founding, but we need to be exclusively and clearly focused on that message.
Yep.
So now I've got my director of operations and a front office person, a biz dev person, and myself. Now we had earlier talked about Kairos.
Yeah.
So I had this network of business people, and many of them along the way were saying, can I join you in what you're doing? I'm like, what am I doing? I'm not sure I know what I'm doing. Well, that thing you're doing in consulting, and you're providing kind of fractional myself leadership into companies. So in essence, along the way, what I had done is I would contract myself to be in a C-suite role alongside the CEO. And several of them along the way would try and hire me as, W-2 full time. And I would say, you don't really need me that much. You're going to overpay. I can do what needs to be done here in 2 days a week, 3 days a week.
Yeah.
And I could come back to that model if you'd like at some point. But the idea was, let me strategically lay out what needs to be done, have the team members execute that, and then we'll come back to make sure that we're on track, and we'll set goals for the next week, and we'll continue to do that.
And a couple of common threads. So we're now in the 2003 era.
Yeah, 2003, 2004.
So one of those common threads that I just know from other conversations is how important Amy is in all of everything in your life, but in the history and the present day OneAccord. the notion of bringing fractional leadership, C-suite leadership. People are trying to hire you to be chief revenue officer, VP of sales, like
Right.
lead the revenue.
Right.
But you're acknowledging that you actually don't need me 40 hours a week, but that's what's customary in this era. In 2003, firms just hired people, salary, 40 hours a week.
Mm-hmm.
And even though that job might be 20 to 25 hours of intense work, the remaining 15 to 20 hours gets filled up with hallway conversations, long lunches, other duties as assigned. But you're bringing something somewhat new into a marketplace.
Nick, I love the opportunity to have this story and share. And we've never gone this deep into the nuance of some of the details. So I want to recognize, first of all, what you said about, a partnership, not just ours, but my wife.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying this facetiously, I've learned more over time to listen more to her counsel. I think if you would go back to that time, I wasn't listening with as much intentionality as I should have. I was becoming more aware in that season of the wisdom of alignment, where we had kind of thought, Jeff, you're doing this part of the business. Amy's like, here's what I'm working on. And we're not necessarily integrated in those things, but there's not discord. There's not lack of alignment in terms of vision and where we're trying to go as a family. But I didn't seek her counsel to the extent that you would find me doing so today. I think it was more the beginning of that understanding. So to say it was always the case, on a 1 to 10, maybe it was a 2 then, and I'm trying to press towards higher numbers today.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Sure.
Okay.
And I would just say back, but it's always been there. Even if it was a 2, it's always been there. That's the common thread.
Learning.
Yeah.
Learning.
Yeah.
So now you hinge on the second thing. What I saw was that there is a percentage of the time that most C-suite, not necessarily the owner, but leaders in organizations and companies, nonprofits and for-profits for that matter, are overpaid for a percentage of what they do, where it would be better to have someone not only less expensive, but maybe being developed into a role by letting go of some of that. And the size companies that I was engaging with, it wasn't Microsoft. I mean, Microsoft would have 5 days a week for me to stay on that momentum curve, provided you're in the right environment and the right leaders and all that. But in these smaller businesses, sub 100 million, so I would say, a couple million, the majority of clients would be a couple million in revenue to 20 million at the time.
And this is $2,003.
Yeah, but even if you augment it for today, right? It was that.
Still in that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not the, individual sole proprietor, right? It's a business, but you've got people in both doing and being strategic, right? Yeah. So they're strategically engaging in the role, but they're also tactically executing in the role. There's kind of a both.
Yeah.
And to bring in someone of the horsepower, the analogy I used to give, because I'm a car person, right, is a Ferrari's a great car. Or I'll say today, an Aston Martin's a great car.
Yeah.
Phenomenal, right? Beautiful, fun to drive. But an Aston Martin in rush hour traffic in downtown Seattle on a hill,
it just doesn't matter.
It's not the best application of that horsepower.
It's going to be comfortable, and the sound system is going to be good.
Yes.
But
you're scraping your front chin spoiler, you're burning up your clutch, it's not the right application, right?
Yeah.
So we would see all this horsepower being deployed into companies that was not being leveraged to the optimum opportunity.
Yeah.
Okay. So you recognize that. Thank you. The challenge that we have, and this is pushing a boulder uphill. This was a very difficult part of our business. This notion where friends are coming to me saying, hey, I'd like to be a part of what you do.
Yeah.
What do I do? Well, that fractional leadership in companies. So if you think back, and we're in a macroeconomic trend right now with boomers transitioning,
Yeah.
but if we go back, there's these extraordinarily talented, very committed, savvy leaders that have been part of a company often for 15, 20, 25 years, that the rug got pulled out from under them
Yeah.
when the market shifted and they were let go. They were expensive headcount, and they were loyal type people. If you go back that time frame, people weren't jumping around, right? You didn't have people jumping from company to company.
Yeah. In the era of 2003, there was still an expectation that someone could be a lifer in a company.
Yeah.
You could be 20, 25 years.
Statistically, if you look at that time on what I was taught in business school at the UW, is you'll probably have two or
careers.
maybe three.
Yeah.
Right. So that was still the mindset. So you had people that were there 20 years at this good company. All of a sudden, overnight, their job disappeared.
Yeah.
Now we're dealing with the kids of those parents at that time, who now we wonder, why do people not have trust for the corporation or prove themselves to be loyal? Because they were around the dinner table when mom came home or dad came home and said, the job I've always shown up just evaporated.
Yeah.
And that young girl or guys in third grade listening.
Yeah.
And we wonder later on, and we think the Gen, whatever you want to call XYZ, they're not loyal.
Disloyal.
Right.
Well, yeah.
What'd they see?
What was the environment there?
So I was dealing with the moms and dads who were saying, I would rather take control of my career.
Yeah. And these are the business professionals in that Kairos community.
A lot of them, yes.
Late 30s, mid 40s, maybe early 50s, but probably in that 35 to 45 bandwidth.
Yeah, for the most part,
yeah.
Correct.
With 15, 20 years experience in industry. So I'd say by and large, top of the game, the top of their game.
Yeah, exactly. As a matter of fact, many people would say they're the perfect people to hire.
Right.
Because they haven't got too expensive perhaps yet, and they're massively productive.
Right.
Still willing to work. So what happened is there were a number of people that said, I would like to join this thing you're doing, which was Red Rover Solutions. And I'm looking, saying, okay, we have a different business. So who are we? So I put together the board and investigated this idea of setting up a new co. And that, as Barry said, the Red Rover, that was a transactional where I'm relational. And so we had existing clients, and I had team members that were part of Red Rover on the consulting side, not the staffing side, because I had terminated all those people. That was a very hard day with really good friends to let them all go. There were, over here though, there were a few consulting engagements with people who were now working in this model of a fractional executive.
And the difference between staffing and fractional executive is that staffing is providing more of the tactical, build the thing, push the buttons, code the work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say, I mean, at that time, who was doing staffing? What clients are more like Microsoft, who was early on in the game, who later had a lawsuit around it about, who's an employee and who works for Microsoft and who doesn't. But it was the larger companies that were doing staffing.
Gotcha.
They're like, can you find me 5 program managers, 2 project managers, and 3 of this technical acumen? But when it came to senior executive leadership, no one was doing that.
Yeah.
Right. So pushing the boulder uphill at that time was this conversation with the business owner around what's more important, the designation W-2 or the problem you're trying to solve. Like, because
this is where you have to educate the market. You've got to teach your ideal client a new way to approach.
Yes,
Yeah.
right. So Clean Break launched OneAccord
What year?
2004,
Yeah.
and the official market
Yeah.
facing January 2005.
Yeah.
So, but in 2004, that internal team learns we're going to be a new business.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to put together a new structure. And I brought in a business partner who was strong at areas that I thought I was not as competent at.
Yeah.
And that business partner, Dave Parker,
Yeah.
was with OneAccord, I believe it's 12 years. I'd have to go back how long it was, but many years.
And there may be pre-OneAccord stories at Red Rover that are similar to this, but Dave is an example of, I'd say, dozens, if not more, really talented folks that have been a part of OneAccord
Mm-hmm.
that have gone on to do exceptional, amazing things.
Mm-hmm.
Some people might recognize Dave right now as the CEO of the Entrepreneurs Organization.
Exactly. Global, CEO.
Yeah.
That's right.
And I, when I think of the history of OneAccord and the honor of being CEO today and that legacy, like that actually is really cool for me. Other folks that I've come to know over the years, Craig Dickens at Merritt Investment Bank and other investment bankers and other, just the list of star players that wore the OneAccord jersey for a while is pretty awesome. How did the name OneAccord come to be?
So the name and really this transition time, right, go hand in hand. And what I had observed in many of the companies when they were not optimizing relative to what the capability was of the team or the market in terms of what they were executing, what I found more than anything was what I would call discord. It was there was just a lack of alignment, either in a family, business partners, or a leader with their leadership team. There was just discord. And the opposite of, as we talked about earlier, of discord is be of one accord. So I started to ruminate around this idea of being in sync. And I often will think of other languages, other illustrations, especially like Greek, if you think Kairos. So we'll go to that for an example. In as we translate Greek to English, one of the words we translate is time. But time in Greek, there's two types of time. There's chronos time, right? Chronological.
Yeah.
So you met Ariana not only on a chronos time, but you met her at a Kairos time, which is a moment in time. It means the right moment or interceded moment.
Yeah.
So Ariana and you came together in a Kairos time, but also on a chronological calendar.
Yeah.
Where had it been a few years this way or that way, that might have been a different outcome, right? So I started pouring through scriptures and I came to a couple verses that talked about be of one accord. Well, I'd already had in my mind this notion of, I see discord, right? So I'm like, that's the name.
Yeah.
And it's one word, as we know, right? ONEACCORD, capital O, capital A.
Yeah.
And so that there's an alignment, right? There's agreement. There's, not only just the vision of where you want to go, but the mission of why you want to go there and the values that you ascribe to as an organization. And so we began with this team with Dave Parker and myself, and I'm just going to take a stab to say there were probably 8 people already at that time engaged in serving different clients under the contract of Red Rover, because
Mm-hmm.
that's where the paper was.
Yeah.
And we set up a new LLC. So we've been working on this with the team 2004, and then publicly came out and said, we're going to change our name. We're going to have a new website, and it needs to address what it is that we're doing, not what the other site said.
Yeah.
Right. So outside my email that got forwarded, everything Red Rover Solutions was done.
Mm-hmm.
And we had this new co.
Yeah.
Taking existing clients, taking existing team through that.
Yeah.
And I think that's important. So the name jumped out to me as I'm reading. And we then decided, okay, everybody's like, love the name.
Yeah.
Absolutely love the name.
Even today, so many people remark just on the name of the business.
I'm so thankful.
Mm-hmm.
Because you couldn't get the URL today. You couldn't trademark the name, but we trademarked it early on.
Yeah.
And there have been lots of others along the way that have come to want to use that name, that we've had to make clear that we actually have rights on that name.
Yeah.
But we don't have rights to the concept.
And in addition to the name of the company telling a story, being representative of, it also strikes me that the way we approach our client engagements is in one accord, as though we are coming along as a partner, as a peer level, as a peer level partner. We're in the work together, as compared to we're a consultant, just throwing slide decks at a problem. We're in the business, and that can make sense more, but it resonates today.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also different than Jeff Rogers Consulting or Rogers and Company.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. It needed to transcend the owner founder.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So we embarked in 2005 as a team to work through what's our mission, what's our vision, and our values. And I would suggest, not only from that experience, but revisiting that a few times along the way, including with you and the team, that the exercise of doing that properly is a lot more arduous and time consuming than it should ever seem to take.
Right.
And I won't say it's the success or the stickiness of it is always proportional to the difficulty and time, but there's a correlation.
There is. It's not a direct fit, but you have said many times, people defend what they fight for. Mm-hmm. And in, our process in 2004 of me coming in and acknowledging, okay, here's new leader in the company. We focused our plan.
Mm-hmm.
And so let's have a check on our mission, vision, values. And we got into it and worked through, pleased to say that the values still remain as they were.
Correct.
Does that go back to 2005?
It does.
Yeah.
It does. Those values, and I remember that we actually, there's little snippets in here. We had an office. It was downtown Bellevue. For those not in this area, that's it's the high-rise city, right? We're in a high-rise. And before we moved here to this really cool old home, which more reflects the type of clients that we work with than sitting in a high-rise in Bellevue. But we went off-site. And I think that's helpful to do sometimes for business, is to get out of your normal place where you do your day-to-day. It doesn't have to be a fancy place, just different, I think is helpful. So we went off-site to Belfield Office Park for a couple of days and worked on this. And the process of coming up with our values, what literally took all day. And we had a facilitator that knew how to do it, which is another key aspect, I think, to have someone who's one expert in it, but also a bit detached from being directly affected by it.
Right.
Larger organizations may have someone internally that would do it, but I would still say to get to objectivity, to have someone that's a third party is probably a good idea. It's helpful, right? So in the case of us doing that, we settled on 3 core values: truth, compassion, and service. And the literal was absolute truth and an absolute compassion. Service is not as hard to explain, but I'll start with service. Really talked about how do we serve the broader ecosystem and community besides just our client.
Yeah.
So most of the business that OneAccord has received over time has been graciously engaged through a relationship, through a trusted advisor to the owner. Maybe an attorney, a banker, a wealth advisor, a consultant, a leasing agent, a family friend, a sister-in-law, but someone's introduced us, right? And we think it's important to serve the broader community. And so that was service. But come back to truth and compassion. So absolute truth is a notion that I would say, Nick, is aspirational. I don't think any of us can live literally in absolute truth.
Yeah.
There was this historical figure a couple thousand years ago that basically challenged people to say, so live by the law. How's that going for you?
Yeah.
How you doing at that?
Yeah.
It's lessons to live life by, but we as humans are going to not always do those things, even though we know that's right. So it's an aspirational leading towards, but it does frame how we engage with each other internally as well as clients, because these values are not just external. They're if anything, they're internal first, I think, most importantly, and then they move into how we treat others. Absolute compassion or grace, truth and grace. What's that mean? And I think where we really came to with experienced seasoned leaders, where you're objective, you can see things that often are fairly obvious in terms of what should change in the organization, just because if you've been in business a long time and you can literally observe, especially in a model where OneAccord is, to be of OneAccord is also not to go solo on most things, but to be part of a team and delivery. So if I've got 2 of us on the engagement or 3, and we can then come back together and say, what do you see, what I see? And you can compare those notes. One is you're not likely to get played if you're by yourself, that you could by yourself. But when you put those notes together, 1 + 1 is more than 2, right? You're gonna find themes. You're gonna find issues. Now we have a formal process for that, right? With a branded and a true methodology in the client success plan.
Right.
But even very early on, we realized we need a diagnostic process to come back to the owner and say, here's what we saw now.
And that diagnostic process has its roots in the values, the company's values of truth, compassion, service, acknowledging absolute truth is aspirational,
right?
Absolute compassion, that just the notion of compassion. And you said we can see things, experienced professionals that have walked around the corner down the dark alley once or twice. They know where things are hiding sometimes. To go into a client's business and just show up and say, well, that and that, it's not going to land well. It's probably not going to be effective, even though it might be the truth, the delivery of that message.
So there's a lot of content that we're talking about today.
Yeah.
It's not all equal in its importance.
Yeah.
Like I want to reflect on you understanding, not just mentally, but in the heart. And that's why you're in the seat. I saw in you the attributes, not only of the ability that I've looked down the hall, but I have the right motivations. I have the right heart to serve. Even back to the story of your mom's business and
Yeah.
what you saw in her business is similar to what I was seeing, where there's a tremendous value here that the owner may not be recognizing or know what to do with, right?
Mm-hmm. So we can't stay on the topic of values long enough to do justice to the importance of values. So, but let's hang out here, because those early values of truth, compassion, and service that were the outcome of a couple of days offsite with a team,
Right.
those values remain 20 years later. Those values are the screen,
Correct.
a screen for bringing people into the company. They are a platform basis foundation on which you and I align,
Right.
to test our partnership,
Mm-hmm.
even before we have any tactical conversation.
Right.
Even before, where's your degree and what's your CV look like? How do we align on values? Yeah.
So where I said we're parking on this a bit
Mm-hmm.
because they're not all the content's not of equal importance.
Right.
Describing, I want to go into, we talked about truth, what compassion means.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't mean being soft.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean withholding because I might offend. It doesn't mean that I'm going to skirt around issues because I'm just being compassionate. It really, grace is a better word because it infers power with reservation.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's, you could do more, but you reserve. And I'll give a parent with a 3-year-old is going to deliver truth differently than to a 16-year-old
Yeah.
in their ability to receive it. So here's what I think compassion means. It's the ability to measure the delivery of truth in the way it can be received.
Mm-hmm.
So it's incumbent upon the truth teller, not the receiver,
Yeah.
to present the information, in this case about their company, in a way that can be heard by the owner.
Yeah.
Okay. That's what we mean by compassion, right? So they have to have ears to hear. And it's our work. And that's why being an experienced leader that's just not a recent graduate with an MBA, which is all wonderful. But if you haven't sat in the seat of leadership and know what that's like to have someone tell you the thing you built is ugly,
Mm-hmm.
and you haven't been through that, the emotion of, I've spent years developing something that now someone else says, we're going to pull the plug, we're going to turn
Yeah.
a different direction, or nice effort, but didn't really hit the mark. When you've done that, you know what that feels like.
When you've had Barry Horn say,
right,
here's what you need to do.
right,
A person who hasn't been on the receiving end of truth may have the capacity for empathy, even sympathy in that case.
right.
Like but even those aren't the same as the value of compassion, the value of grace.
Right.
Really.
Right. So to draw just a fun analogy for any of those that have watched Seinfeld, there's an episode, one of my favorites, and they, Elaine and George, I think at the time, Jerry's in another room, are standing over a crib, and the episode is the ugly baby.
Yeah.
George looks in and goes, your baby is remarkable. And Elaine goes, unbelievable. So you're telling someone their baby's ugly. So not only are you needing to be clear in communication and probably not emotional, but also measured in what you deliver in truth. So what I've seen, and as we look at the client success plan, or early on, it was not by that name, but process-wise similar, is you can deliver 2 or 3 key strategic messages and maybe 2 or 3 kind of tactical. Hey, these are some things you could improve. For example, at a company I've been working in recently, where all the data existed on hard drives and Google Drives and Dropbox and who knows where, and we moved everything to the cloud.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a tactical, didn't really hurt the feelings of the owners. Everybody in the company is like, this is probably a lot better. We're not very secure. Okay, that's a tactical thing, right?
Yeah.
But to recognize that you have the wrong person in senior leadership sitting in a seat, that's strategic. So you can really deliver maybe 2 or 3 things to an owner in any one sitting, of which then there's many things. So this is where it's really interesting, Nick. There may be 10 things that are strategic. And someone may say, well, absolute truth is I'm going to give them all 10.
Right.
And you see it about 2 or 3, they shut down. Right. They're like, their eyes are glossy. They're not
overwhelming. It's too much.
Right.
Couldn't possibly.
Right.
Yeah.
So actually serving them is to say the 2 or 3, and maybe of the 10, it's number 7, 8, and 9, or maybe 1, 2, and 3 don't even get to yet, because you need to earn trust.
Yeah.
They need to realize you have their best interest. And maybe what your proposal out of that CSP is, we're going to tackle these 2 tactical things that are low-hanging fruit, and we're going to work on 1 strategic. I'm going to let you know about 2 strategic things, or maybe 3, but I'm going to measure my delivery, which is being compassionate, that they can receive what it is truth.
The notion of compassion being a value, a core value, truth being a core value, service, more important than even resume, CV, education. And I look at Ryan Shope, who is he's a young guy as compared to most of the people at OneAccord. In my direct experience, one of the most skilled at delivering truth with compassion, because I've been on the receiving side of Ryan, right? And it, when Ryan delivers news that's similar conversation. Barry says to Jeff, "Here's a decision that you need to make." Ryan, here are the facts, Jack.
Right.
But delivered in a way, understanding, feeling it, grace, to be on the receiving end of that is, it actually feels good. I would say to an extent, it feels loving, the combination of, but back to values and how important that is, even more important than, somebody having been, CEO for 20 years. There are CEOs that are not compassionate. That happens. So, okay. Values established. You're in the offsite. It's 2005. You've got a new name. You've got a new business partner.
Right.
So you're moving forward in a new paradigm. What are the early years of OneAccord with Jeff and Dave?